My name is Maria Martinez, and I'm 36 years old. I'm sitting in the security office of the Marriott Downtown Austin, holding a USB drive that contains footage from their security cameras. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely grip it. 3 weeks ago, I was a happily married mother of 2. Today, I'm about to become a single mom, and it all started with what I saw on this hotel's surveillance system. If you're watching this from your home, your office, or wherever you are right now, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. What I'm about to share with you will show you that sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places. Stay with me as I take you back 3 weeks to when I still believed my marriage was solid. 3 weeks ago, my life looked perfect from the outside. James and I had been married for 12 years, living in a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Cedar Park, just outside Austin, Texas. I worked as a medical assistant at a family practice downtown, while James was a sales manager for a tech company. We had 2 amazing kids. Emma, our 10-year-old daughter, was this incredibly bright girl who played violin beautifully. Tyler, our 7-year-old son, was pure energy, always bouncing a soccer ball around our backyard. Our mornings followed the same comfortable routine. I'd wake up at 6:30, start the coffee, and begin preparing breakfast while James showered. The kids would stumble downstairs around 7. Emma already dressed and ready. Tyler usually missing a sock or wearing his shirt backwards. We'd all eat together at our kitchen table, the one James had built himself when we first moved in. He'd kiss me goodbye, ruffle the kids' hair, and head off to work in his blue Honda Accord. Weekends were our family time. We'd often drive to Zilker Park for barbecues, spreading out our red checkered blanket under the oak trees. Sometimes we'd spend Saturday afternoons at the Domain walking through the shops while the kids begged for ice cream. Emma would always drag us into Barnes & Noble to look at music books, while Tyler made a beeline for the toy section. These were the moments I treasured most, watching James laugh with our children, seeing him throw Tyler up in the air until the little boy squealed with delight. Our house was in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other. Mrs. Patterson next door would wave from her garden every morning as I backed out of the driveway to take the kids to school. The Johnsons across the street had kids around the same age as ours, and summer evenings often meant impromptu gatherings in someone's backyard, while the children played until dark. But about 3 months ago, things started to change in small ways. James began working late more frequently. At first, it was just 1 night a week, then 2, then 3. He'd come home around 9 or 10 exhausted, explaining that his company had landed a huge client in Houston, and the project demanded extra hours. I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? In 12 years of marriage, James had never given me a reason to doubt him. I started keeping dinner warm for him sometimes, falling asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. When he'd finally arrive, he'd kiss my forehead and whisper that he was sorry for being so late. He'd shower immediately, saying he felt grimy from the long day at the office. I thought he was just being considerate, not wanting to bring work stress into our bed. The first real red flag came when our family vacation to South Padre Island was approaching. We'd planned this trip for months, booked the beachfront condo, arranged time off work. 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, James told me he couldn't go. The Houston project had hit a critical phase, he said, and his presence was absolutely essential. I was disappointed, but I understood. James had always been dedicated to his career, and his success had given us a comfortable life. Then there were the smaller changes that I initially dismissed. James bought new Cologne Armani Code, a significant upgrade from the Old Spice he'd used for years. When I commented on how nice it smelled, he said his colleague had recommended it, that it was more professional for client meetings. He also started putting his phone face down on tables and had added a passcode, something he'd never done before. When I asked about it, he said his company had implemented new security protocols for all employees. These changes felt minor at the time, just small shifts in routine that happen in any long marriage. I was busy with my own job, managing the kids' schedules and keeping our household running smoothly. Emma had violin lessons twice a week, Tyler had soccer practice, and I was involved with the PTA at their school. Life was full and demanding, leaving little time for deep analysis of every small change in James's behavior. But deep down, something was starting to feel off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a vague sense that the rhythm of our family life had shifted. James seemed distracted during dinner conversations, often checking his phone, even when the kids were telling him about their day. He'd started doing laundry more often, particularly his work clothes, saying he wanted to make sure he looked sharp for all these important meetings. The real alarm bells started ringing during Emma's violin recital at school. This was a big deal for her. She'd been practicing Pachelbel's canon for months, and this was her first solo performance. James had promised he'd be there front row, just like he'd been for every important moment in our children's lives. But 20 minutes before the recital started, he texted me saying he had an emergency meeting that couldn't be postponed. I sat alone in that auditorium, clapping for my daughter while fighting back tears of disappointment. Emma looked for her daddy in the audience, and I saw her face fall when she realized he wasn't there. After the performance, she asked where he was, and I had to explain about the important work meeting. She nodded, trying to be understanding, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. That night, James sent a selfie from what he said was his office with a caption apologizing for missing the recital. But something in the photo bothered me. In the reflection of the window behind him, I could see what looked like restaurant lighting and other people, definitely not his office building. When he got home around midnight, I asked about the photo. He explained that they'd moved the meeting to a restaurant to discuss the project over dinner with the client. My best friend Sarah had gone through a divorce 2 years earlier, and she'd started dropping subtle hints about being careful. During our weekly coffee at radio, she'd ask pointed questions about James's work schedule and whether I'd verified any of his stories. I'd brush off her concerns, telling her that James wasn't like her ex-husband. But Sarah's words planted seeds of doubt that I couldn't quite shake. One evening, I stayed up late waiting for James to come home from another late meeting. When he finally arrived at 11:45, I hugged him and immediately smelled women's perfume on his shirt. It was a floral scent, definitely not anything I wore. When I asked about it, James explained that he'd been sitting next to a female colleague in the conference room, and she'd been wearing strong perfume that must have transferred to his clothes. I started paying closer attention to details I'd previously ignored. The mileage on James's car didn't match what it should be if he was only driving to and from his downtown office. I found a receipt from Uchi, an expensive sushi restaurant on South Lamar, dated on a night when James said he'd eaten dinner at the office. When I asked about it, he said it was a business dinner with the Houston client that he'd forgotten to mention. The phone calls became more frequent and more suspicious. One night at 2 a.m, James's phone rang. He answered quickly, mumbled something about wrong number, and hung up. But I distinctly heard a woman's voice before the line went dead. James went back to sleep immediately, but I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when I was leaving Target after picking up supplies for Tyler's upcoming school project. As I walked toward my car, I spotted James's Honda Accord across the parking lot. He was standing next to it with a woman I didn't recognize. She had shoulder-length blonde hair and was wearing a business suit. They were embracing, not a friendly hug, but the kind of intimate embrace reserved for couples. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out right there in the Target parking lot. I ducked behind a row of cars and watched as they talked for a few more minutes before getting into separate vehicles. By the time I gathered the courage to drive closer to where they'd been standing, both cars were gone. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd just seen, trying to find an innocent explanation that would make sense. When I got home, James was already there starting dinner as if nothing had happened. He asked how my day had been, helped Tyler with his math homework, and acted completely normal. I wanted to confront him about what I'd seen, but I realized I needed more than just a suspicious hug in a parking lot. I needed concrete proof of what was happening. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. James had left for a 3-day business trip to Denver, or so he'd told me. I dropped the kids off at school and drove straight to our bank to check our account statements online. What I found made my stomach drop to the floor. There were multiple charges at the Marriott Downtown Austin, each for $250, dating back almost 2 months. The dates corresponded perfectly with James's late work nights. I printed out the statements with shaking hands, staring at the evidence in black and white. My husband hadn't been working late. He'd been staying at a hotel 20 minutes from our house. I sat in my car outside the bank calling the Marriott. I disguised my voice and pretended to be James's secretary, asking to confirm his reservation details. The receptionist was helpful, mentioning that Mr. Martinez had been a regular guest and always booked the same suite. She asked if I needed to make any changes to his usual arrangement, and I quickly said no and hung up. The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, my life was crumbling around me. But I knew I needed more than bank statements and hotel reservations. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, and staring at the ceiling for hours, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to that hotel, and I was going to find out exactly what my husband had been doing there. The next morning, after dropping Emma and Tyler at school, I drove to the Marriott Downtown Austin. My palms were sweating as I walked through the elegant lobby toward the front desk. I asked to speak with the security manager, explaining that I was dealing with a personal matter and needed help reviewing security footage. The security manager, David Thompson, was a kind man in his early 50s who wore a wedding ring and had photos of his own family on his desk. When I explained my situation, his expression softened with understanding. He said he'd seen this scenario too many times before, and while he couldn't normally show footage to non-law enforcement, he was willing to make an exception given the circumstances. He asked me to sign a waiver and warned me that what I might see could be difficult to process. I signed the papers with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. Mr. Thompson pulled up the security system on his computer and asked for specific dates. I gave him the dates from the bank statements, starting with the most recent one from the week before. As the footage loaded, I held my breath, hoping against hope that there would be some innocent explanation for everything. The lobby camera showed James walking through the front entrance at 6:15 in the evening. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her hand in his, was a woman with dark brown hair wearing a navy blue dress. As they turned toward the elevators, the woman's face became clearly visible on the camera. My world collapsed in that instant. The woman was Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer Walsh, whose husband Tom was James's best friend since college. Jennifer Walsh, who had been to our house for dinner countless times. Jennifer Walsh, who I'd chatted with at barbecues and school events, who had complimented my cooking and asked about my work schedule, who had always seemed so interested in when James would be home from his business trips. Mr. Thompson saw my reaction and immediately offered me a chair and a glass of water. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. I just stared at the screen, watching my husband of 12 years walk hand in hand with our friend toward the hotel elevators. I asked to see more footage, and Mr. Thompson, despite his obvious discomfort with the situation, agreed to show me additional clips. The camera in the 12th floor hallway showed James and Jennifer entering the presidential suite together. Jennifer was carrying an overnight bag, the kind I'd seen her use for weekend trips with her family. They kissed passionately outside the suite door before James used a keycard to let them in. Mr. Thompson pulled up more dates, and the pattern was consistent. Every time James had told me he was working late, the security cameras showed him arriving at the hotel with Jennifer. Sometimes they'd stay for just a few hours. Other times, Jennifer's overnight bag suggested they were planning to stay the entire night. The timestamps showed they'd been doing this for at least 2 months, possibly longer. I completely broke down in that security office, sobbing so hard that Mr. Thompson had to bring me a box of tissues and a bottle of water. He patted my shoulder awkwardly and kept saying he was sorry I had to see this, but that every woman deserved to know the truth about her marriage. He offered to make copies of the relevant footage for me, saying it might be helpful if I decided to pursue legal action. As I drove home with a USB drive containing the security footage, my mind was flooded with memories that now took on completely different meanings. All those times Jennifer had asked about James's work schedule, all those compliments about what a hardworking man I'd married, all those questions about when he'd be traveling for business. She hadn't been making conversation. She'd been gathering intelligence, planning their secret meetings. I remembered how Jennifer had always seemed so interested in our marriage, asking questions about how James and I kept the romance alive after so many years. I'd been flattered by her interest, thinking she was looking for advice for her own marriage to Tom. Now I realized she'd been studying our relationship, looking for weaknesses, figuring out how to insert herself into our lives without raising suspicion. That afternoon, I picked up Emma and Tyler from school and tried to act normal. When Emma asked where Daddy was, I told her he was still on his business trip in Denver, just like he'd told us. I made their favorite dinner, helped with homework, and got them ready for bed, all while the USB drive sat in my purse, like a bomb waiting to explode our family apart. After the kids were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and forced myself to watch the footage again. Each viewing made the betrayal more real, more devastating. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a mistake. This was a deliberate, ongoing affair with someone I'd trusted, someone who had sat at my dinner table and played with my children. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I began planning what I would do next. I could confront James when he returned from Denver, demand explanations, fight for my marriage. Or I could choose a different path, one that preserved my dignity and protected my children from the inevitable chaos that would follow a dramatic confrontation. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to confront James. I wasn't going to scream or throw his belongings on the lawn or create the kind of dramatic scene that would traumatize our children and become neighborhood gossip. Instead, I was going to leave quietly and start over somewhere he couldn't manipulate or gaslight me into believing his lies. The first call I made was to Patricia Kim, a divorce attorney recommended by Sarah. Ms. Kim squeezed me in for an emergency consultation that same morning. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had clearly dealt with situations like mine many times before. She advised me to gather all financial documents, open my own bank account, and document everything related to James's affair before taking any action. While James was still supposedly in Denver, I methodically photographed every important document in our house: tax returns, insurance policies, bank statements, investment accounts, mortgage papers, everything Ms. Kim had told me I'd need. I used my phone to take pictures of each page, creating a digital record that James couldn't destroy or hide. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings account, $23,000, into a new account I opened under my maiden name at a different bank across town. Ms. Kim had assured me this was perfectly legal since the money belonged to both of us and I was entitled to protect my financial interests. The school counselor, Ms. Rodriguez, was incredibly supportive when I explained that the children and I might need to relocate due to family circumstances. She provided resources for children dealing with divorce and assured me that Emma and Tyler's academic records could be transferred quickly if needed. She also recommended a child psychologist who specialized in helping kids adjust to family transitions. I spent the next 2 days apartment hunting, looking for a place where the children and I could start fresh. I found a perfect 3-bedroom apartment in the Muller district close enough to their current school that they wouldn't have to change districts immediately. The apartment had a community pool and playground amenities that would help make the transition feel less like punishment and more like an adventure. I signed the lease under my maiden name Martinez and arranged for utilities to be connected. I also contacted a moving company, scheduling them for Saturday morning when James typically played golf with his buddies. I'd timed everything carefully to minimize trauma for the children and avoid a confrontational scene with James. My mother, Rosa Martinez, drove up from San Antonio as soon as I called and explained what was happening. She brought my cousin Miguel, who had helped her move twice and knew how to pack efficiently. Mom was furious with James but focused on supporting me and the grandchildren she adored. She'd raised me and my 3 siblings as a single mother after my father left when I was 12, so she understood the challenges I was about to face. I carefully packed the children's belongings over several days, taking everything that mattered to them while leaving behind anything that was clearly marital property: Emma's violin and music books, Tyler's soccer trophies and favorite toys, their clothes books, and the artwork they'd created that I'd been saving in boxes in the closet. I packed family photos, but only ones that included the children without James. I left behind our wedding album photos of James and me together, gifts he'd given me over the years. I took my grandmother's jewelry, my college diploma, my medical certifications, and anything that was specifically mine. I also packed the children's baby books and keepsakes items that chronicled their lives and that they'd want to have when they were older. Friday evening was surreal. We had dinner as a family, James talking about his upcoming golf game and asking about the kids' weekend plans. He helped Tyler practice his spelling words and listened to Emma play her violin, acting like the devoted father he'd always been. I watched him interact with our children and wondered how he could compartmentalize his life so completely. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my emotional state perfectly. James left for golf at 6:30 as usual, kissing me goodbye and saying he'd probably grab lunch with the guys afterward. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, I called my mom and Miguel. They arrived with the moving truck at 7, just as the children were waking up. I'd prepared what I was going to say to Emma and Tyler, practicing the words until they sounded natural. I woke them gently and explained that we were going on an adventure to a new home, that Mommy had found a beautiful apartment with a pool, and that we'd all be very happy there. Emma, being older and more perceptive, immediately asked where Daddy was and why he hadn't said goodbye. I told her that Daddy and I needed some time apart to work through grown-up problems, and that they'd still see him very often. Tyler, at 7 years old, was more excited about the moving truck than worried about the implications. He wanted to help carry boxes and kept asking if he could ride in the truck. The packing process was emotionally devastating, but also therapeutic. With each box we loaded, I felt like I was reclaiming my life. We packed the children's artwork from the refrigerator family recipes I'd collected over the years. Christmas decorations that had been part of our traditions. I left behind anything that reminded me of the lie my marriage had become. The hardest part was packing Emma's baby book. Every page chronicled milestones that James and I had celebrated together. First steps, first words, first days of school, birthday parties, where James had been present and loving. I realized that not everything in our marriage had been a lie, that James had been a good father even while being an unfaithful husband. But the betrayal had tainted even the good memories. At 11, I did a final walkthrough of the house we'd called home for 8 years. I left a letter for James on the kitchen counter next to the USB drive containing the security footage. The letter was brief and to the point. Found security camera footage from Marriott Downtown. Taking kids to safe place. My lawyer will contact you about custody arrangements. Don't try to find us today, in case you want to remember why your family left. Our new apartment felt enormous after the cramped moving truck. The children were amazed by their larger bedrooms and the view of the community pool from the living room windows. Miguel assembled furniture while Mom organized the kitchen, and I focused on making the kids' rooms feel familiar and safe. We hung their artwork on the walls and arranged their stuffed animals and books exactly as they'd been in their old rooms. For dinner, I ordered pizza from a local place near our new apartment, starting what I declared would be our new Saturday tradition. As we sat on boxes in our unfurnished living room eating pizza off paper plates, Tyler announced that this was the best day ever because he got to eat dinner on the floor. Emma was quieter still, processing the magnitude of the change, but she seemed relieved to be away from the tension that had been building at home. James called repeatedly throughout the evening. I sent every call to voicemail, listening later as his messages evolved from confusion to anger to pleading. His first message was simply asking where we were and if everything was okay. By the 10th message, he was demanding that I answer my phone and bring his children home immediately. His final message of the night was a tearful plea, asking me to call him so we could work things out. I responded to his frantic text messages only once, typing, "Children are safe. My lawyer will contact you Monday. We need space." Then I turned off my phone and focused on helping Emma and Tyler settle into their new beds, in their new rooms, in our new life. Monday morning brought the reality of our new routine. Emma and Tyler started their first day at the same school, but from a new address, riding a different bus route that picked them up at the Muller Community Center. The school counselor, Miss Rodriguez, checked in with both children, and I'd arranged for her to continue monitoring their adjustment over the coming weeks. Emma struggled more than Tyler with the transition. At 10, she understood that families don't usually move overnight without Daddy, and she asked difficult questions I wasn't always prepared to answer. I'd enrolled her in individual counseling with Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who specialized in helping kids navigate family changes. Tyler, with the resilience that 7-year-olds often possess, adapted quickly to the new routine and made friends with neighborhood kids who played at the community pool after school. Returning to work was both a challenge and a blessing. My colleagues at the medical practice were incredibly supportive, especially Dr. Patricia Stevens, my supervisor who had gone through her own divorce several years earlier. She offered me a flexible schedule that would allow me to manage the children's needs while maintaining my income and benefits. Our evenings developed new rhythms. Homework time at the kitchen table, dinner together every night, bedtime stories that continued our family traditions while acknowledging our changed circumstances. I was determined that the children would feel stable and loved, even though our family structure had changed dramatically. James's lawyer contacted Patricia Kim within the week, and we began the process of establishing a custody arrangement. James wanted joint custody 50-50 time with the children, but I insisted on primary custody, with him having alternate weekends and Wednesday evening visits. Given the circumstances of our separation and his deception, my lawyer felt confident we could negotiate favorable terms. The first custody exchange was awkward and painful. James looked devastated when he picked up Emma and Tyler for their first weekend at his apartment. The children were confused and a little scared, clinging to me longer than usual. James and I barely spoke, communicating only about pickup and drop-off times and the children's immediate needs. Over the following months, we all gradually adapted to our new reality. The children learned to navigate having two homes, packing their backpacks with homework and favorite belongings for transitions between houses. Emma continued to excel at violin, and James and I managed to attend her school concert separately. Sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium, but both cheering for our daughter. Tyler joined a new soccer team in our neighborhood and quickly made friends. The other parents were welcoming, and I found myself connecting with several other single mothers who understood the challenges of managing work parenting and personal healing simultaneously. Susan Park, whose son was Tyler's teammate, became a particularly close friend, and our kids often had play dates while we talked over coffee about the complexities of single parenting. I started individual therapy with Dr. Linda Chen, working through the trauma of betrayal and the process of rebuilding my identity as a single woman rather than half of a couple. Through therapy, I began to understand that the signs of James's affair had been present for months before I consciously acknowledged them. I also worked on forgiving myself for trusting my husband, learning that faithfulness in marriage should be an assumption, not something I needed to constantly verify. 6 months after leaving James, I realized something surprising. I felt stronger and more independent than I had in years. Managing our household budget, making decisions about the children's activities, and creating new traditions gave me a sense of competence and self-reliance I'd forgotten I possessed. Our small apartment felt more like home than our large house ever had, perhaps because it was built on truth rather than lies. I discovered I enjoyed home improvement projects, painting the children's rooms, their favorite colors, and hanging family photos that reflected our new reality. Emma chose purple for her room and helped me paint an accent wall behind her bed. Tyler wanted his room to look like a soccer field, so we painted green walls and hung his trophies and team photos. These projects gave us bonding time and helped make our apartment truly ours. Financially, I was surprised to find that I could manage quite well on my income alone. Without James's expensive dinners, hotel stays, and gifts for his affair partner, our monthly expenses were actually lower than they'd been during our marriage. I was even able to start a small savings account for the children's future college expenses. Emma and Tyler continued to thrive in their new environment. Emma became more confident and independent, perhaps because she no longer sensed the underlying tension that had permeated our home during the final months of my marriage. Tyler remained his happy, energetic self, and his new soccer friends often came over for Saturday morning practice, followed by pool time at our apartment complex. As I reflected on our journey, I realized that James's betrayal, while devastating at the time, had actually freed me from a marriage built on deception. I was no longer living in the shadow of lies, no longer wondering why my husband seemed distracted or distant. The security camera footage that had destroyed my faith in my marriage had also given me the truth I needed to build an authentic life. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at Tyler's soccer game cheering as he scored a goal and ran toward me with his arms raised in victory. Emma was beside me reading a book between plays, but looking up to celebrate her brother's success. In that moment, surrounded by other families but completely content with my own small unit, I realized something profound. I was genuinely happy. This wasn't the happiness I'd been performing during the last months of my marriage, when I'd smiled and laughed while sensing something was fundamentally wrong. This was real joy, the kind that comes from living authentically and raising children in an environment of honesty and stability. The woman I'd been before, the one who'd waited up nights wondering why her husband was working so late, felt like a different person entirely. That woman had been living in a state of constant low-level anxiety, always sensing that something was off, but unable to identify what it was. The woman I'd become was confident, independent, and at peace with her choices. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the door to your best life. I thought being a single mom would break me, but it actually made me whole. The security camera showed me the truth I needed to see, not just about James's betrayal, but about my own strength. I didn't need someone who could lie to my face every day while planning secret meetings with another woman. I needed to learn that I could build a beautiful life with just me and my children, and that's exactly what we did. Some of you watching this might be facing your own security camera moment. Maybe you found receipts that don't make sense, or you're noticing changes in your partner's behavior that feel suspicious. Trust your instincts, trust your worth, and know that whatever truth you discover, whether it's betrayal, lies, or broken promises, it's not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of your real one. If my story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between staying in a comfortable lie or facing a painful truth? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it helped you in any way, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in life's most challenging moments. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what's hurting you, even when it means starting over. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve a life built on truth.